Hey, this is Jurgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis Vlog. This episode, I'm going to give you my number one favorite of all times hypnosis book. So, I've read hypnosis books for the last 25 years. I've probably read way too many, and a lot of people ask me, what's the one book you would recommend on hypnosis, or what's your favorite hypnosis book? And in my case, it's really, really easy. My favorite all-time hypnosis book is a book that no one ever mentions and hardly anyone seems to know about. It's this one. It's called The Inner Source: Exploring Hypnosis, and it's written by a guy called Donald S. Connery. Now, Donald S. Connery isn't even a hypnotist or a hypnotherapist. He's a journalist. But he's a damn good writer. Like, he really knows how to tell a good, compelling, you might even say hypnotic story. And the story is about the career of the psychiatrist and hypnosis pioneer Herbert Spiegel, who is one of my main influences in terms of how I think about hypnosis. So I highly recommend that you get this book. It should be a mandatory reading for any hypnotherapist, and I also think any psychologist or NLP practitioner or anyone who's really interested in human psychology. There's so much to learn from the field of hypnosis and also from this particular book. So how did I reach this conclusion? And what, in my opinion, makes this book so great and so great for me? So let me offer this. I still remember the day. It was back in 2003. It was a really cold day here in Norway, and I walked into a bookstore in Oslo, Norway. Freezing cold, right? And my practice was a little bit slow. I felt a little bit down. I needed some inspiration, and I was walking, looking at books because I really love books. And this book, The Inner Source: Exploring Hypnosis, appeared, and I started looking at it, and I got really, really absorbed, and I started reading it. And to me, it was like a glass of ice cold water on a really hot day. Like the book really hit home. It really made sense. Now, to give you some context, at this particular time, I was about 5 years into my client work or change work practice. And my practice was very hypnosis oriented, and my main influences in terms of hypnosis were Milton Erickson and Dave Elman at the time. And I had this idea that if only I could get good, hypnotic responses from clients, that was a big part of the hypnosis process. And of course, both Elman and Erickson used to spread this idea that anyone could do hypnosis and that everyone was hypnotizable per se. Now, this book, The Inner Source by Donald S. Connery, which is about the hypnotic teachings of Herbert Spiegel, Spiegel was the first hypnosis expert I read who said, no, that's not true. People vary wildly in their hypnotic capacities. Some people are pretty much non-hypnotizable, meaning they have very little, if any, hypnotic talent whatsoever. Some people are highly hypnotizable and have a lot of hypnotic talent, and most of us fall somewhere in between. And of course, this is a pretty good finding from the hypnosis lab over decades of testing, is that hypnotic capacity seems to be remarkably stable. It's about as stable as IQ testing if done over a 25-year interval. I think it's even a little bit more stable than IQ testing. And of course, I'm very familiar. Like, I have an NLP background, so I was kind of, brought up with this idea that, anyone can do everything, and if one person can do it, you can just model it. And I was breaking my back in a sense, trying to get good hypnotic responses with every client, and basing so much of my change work upon it. And it was such a relief at the time to have a reputable hypnosis professional agree with me, with my own conclusion that not everyone was equally hypnotizable. Now, I am well aware, because I've done a lot of experimentation with trying to improve people's hypnotic capacity. I'm very aware of Nicholas Spanos and Barber, TX Barber, and Chavez, and the Carleton Skills Training Program, and all that sort of stuff. And I respectfully, for the most part, disagree with the idea that they were able to turn low hypnotizables into high hypnotizables. I don't think that is quite accurate. So one thing that Spiegel does in the book is that he really emphasizes that if you're going to use hypnosis or some form of psychotherapy, you really have to adapt your intervention to the hypnotic capacity of the client. This was such an important point to me, because if you look at a lot of the hypnosis literature and a lot of the NLP literature, so much of it is based upon success cases and what you might be able to do if you have someone who's really responsive, right? But not everyone is necessarily that responsive. So this particular book goes into how Spiegel would adapt his work to the hypnotic capacity, or what seemed to be the hypnotic capacity of his clients. This dramatically influenced my work. One thing I noticed when I first started studying NLP, for example, was that the demonstration subjects in seminars, who it was easy to do impressive demonstrations with, all seem to have, the capacity to make imagery, visual imagery, in conscious awareness. They seem to have very good see-feel circuits, or synesthesia circuits. They seem to be really good at accessing states. And they seem to have, at least some good hypnotic capacity, the capacities for absorption, dissociation, and suggestibility. Now, if you can find a demo subject like that, it's really easy to look spectacular, and good trainers know how to select for that. But one of my issues as a practitioner when I came back home from training was that I would suddenly get, people who were not very good at visualizing in conscious awareness, people who didn't have good access to their emotions, couldn't name their emotions, couldn't really process their emotions, people who were just riddled in internal dialogue, and people who seemed to have very low hypnotic capacity. What the hell do you do with these folks? This is an issue that Spiegel addressed very well in Connery's book. So that's one reason why I think this book is so good. It's very honest. Spiegel's teachings, I think, are very honest, very pragmatic, very straightforward. The other thing is, if you go to NLP trainings and hypnosis trainings and you read many of the books, it's very easy to get the idea that A, everyone's equally hypnotizable, and B, if you can just get these high hypnotic phenomena, you've got your work cut out for you. But this is not necessarily the case. What I had started to discover at the time was that Many of the highly hypnotizable clients, while you could often help them make some spectacular rapid changes, it often came at a cost. The changes would often not be that stable. And there's a lot of pitfalls and traps that you can fall into when you work with highly hypnotizable clients. No other book I had read at that time, and I was already 5 years into my practice, had ever addressed the idea that highly hypnotizable clients came with their own pitfalls, so to speak, and how to troubleshoot around that. And again, how to adapt your interventions to the hypnotic capacity of the client. So this is something else too that made this book really stand out for me. And if you've read my books, Provocative Hypnosis and Provocative Suggestions, especially in Provocative Hypnosis, which was written in the mid 2000s in a kind of earlier stage of my career where I was very hypnosis oriented, you'll see that this is one of the hallmarks of my own book, is how I would adapt what I did to the hypnotic capacities of the clients and help people troubleshoot how to work with the low hypnotizables and the highly hypnotizables. Another point that this book makes really well is that high hypnotizability or a very responsive client does not necessarily mean any better outcomes. So learning how to troubleshoot around that. Something else that I really appreciate about this particular book and Spiegel's work as well is that Spiegel would do put a lot of emphasis on how hypnotizability relates to cognitive processes, emotional processes, and personality tendencies. He would write about stuff like wrongful convictions, false confessions, the whole scandal of multiple personalities, which seems to be created by therapists when they work with very suggestible clients. This has a lot to do with hypnotizability. The whole recovered memory movement, where people would discover memories of abuse in therapy, which in all likelihood are a result of the suggestive process. Spiegel was one of the folks who very early rang the alarm in terms of how a lot of clients got duped, because a lot of therapists don't understand suggestibility and the traps that can easily come with having a lot of hypnotic capacity. Of course, one drawback here is I think Spiegel may have overestimated the role of high hypnotic capacity when it comes to these sort of issues. There are other factors at play, but it's certainly one factor, and Spiegel deserves credit for bringing those things to the table. He was, for example, a very stark critic of the whole Sybil phenomena, based upon the book on the alleged multiple personality Sybil. It was a great hit in the 70s in the United States. There's also a lot of... So Spiegel himself, during the Second World War, had a lot of experience using hypnosis in the war setting, working with people who were traumatized and people who were injured and were in shock. There's a lot of interesting stuff there in the book. There's a lot of interesting stuff on how Spiegel developed his hypnosis course for physicians, and a lot of very practical applications, from smoking, fear of flying, stuttering, asthma, pain. Again, very, very practical, very, very pragmatic. There's also some very interesting stuff on personality tendencies and hypnotic capacity. Now, as one critical thing I would offer here is, I think that the way Spiegel ties up hypnotic capacity and personality tendencies, I don't think it's as tight as Spiegel suggests. I don't think those findings hold up as well as he would like to. As an example, if you're familiar with Spiegel's kind of theory about personality tendencies and hypnotic responsiveness, take a look at a guy like the neuroscientist and philosopher Sam Harris, who would clearly, according to Spiegel, be a low hypnotizable, but Harris is actually a high hypnotizable, as confirmed by tests. So, but I think there's quite a bit to it. I think it's more accurate than not. Something else too with his whole the eye roll. Like he claimed to discover this biological marker in a person's ability to do an eye roll and hypnotic capacity. Very interesting. I spent many months testing that theory with my own clients. I would do the eye roll after having done hypnotic work, not before, so that my own expectations wouldn't influence my findings. And I did not find the eye roll marker to be as tight as Spiegel claims. But again, I found it to be slightly more accurate than not. So still useful. And something else that's very interesting about Spiegel's book too, or Spiegel's work, is how he would use a person's hypnotic capacity very often as kind of a diagnostic assessment tool, very often to help people discover, like there are certain psychological symptoms that people with various degrees of hypnotic capacity tend to have or not have. So knowing a little bit about someone's hypnotic capacity can tell you quite a bit about another human being in terms of diagnosis and assessment and how likely it might be that something is psychosomatic versus organic, for example. So this particular book was way ahead of its time. It's I don't agree with all of it. My work is way less based upon hypnosis is in any strict way these days than it used to be. But this was an extremely useful book for me, and I highly recommend it. I'll recommend another book too, and that is, if you want it from a clinician's perspective, it's called Trance and Treatment. It's by Herbert Spiegel and his son David Spiegel. I don't find it quite as well written as Donald Connery's book, but this one too is an excellent book. It goes into interventions for all sorts of issues you may face as a hypnotherapist. It goes into personality tendencies, the eye roll, hypnotic testing, assessment, diagnosis, the unique challenges you may face with highly hypnotizable folks, and all sorts of stuff. So again, I highly recommend that you check those books out. Even if you're not a hypnotherapist, it'll teach you quite a bit about human psychology to read those particular books. So if you have read those books, let me know what you think. If you have your own hypnosis recommendation in terms of books, post them wherever you find this video, but make sure that you add your reasoning behind it, why you made those books great. So till next time, get the book. Hope you enjoy it.